Welcome back. General Banerjee, Professor Kandapalli was talking about the military measures that can be adopted to convey a message to China that we are talking from a position of strength now. India is not the India of 1962. Do you think we have the military capabilities to take on the huge Chinese buildup that has been taking place on the Tibetan plateau?
Well, of course, at one stage, the reality today is that China has spent an enormous amount of money in preparing and building up its defenses. The PLA today also is no longer what it was in the early years, late 50s and early 60s, and they've changed dramatically. But the Indian Army is fundamentally different. It was an army then which never contemplated the use of force, and just its own presence was enough, so-called, to deter the Chinese, which of course proved a disaster in our strategic thinking. Today, the whole situation is dramatically different. Both India and China are nuclear weapon powers. A conflict, a war between nuclear weapon powers is not to be contemplated, and neither is it likely. Conventionally, our forces are immeasurably stronger, and hence the type of teach a lesson war that Mao inflicted on India in 1962 would instead lead to a teach a lesson a la Vietnam of 1979 on the Chinese. And so there are these dramatic differences that exist today.
Professor Kandapalli, you have been reading the Chinese mind and their behavior for years now. What do you make of the Chinese relationship with Pakistan? It has been argued that China continues to prop up Pakistan to ensure that India continues to remain bogged down in South Asia and doesn't play a bigger role both in Asia and in world affairs. Do you buy that?
Indeed. I think one of the reasons why we have not been able to really actively pursue the territorial dispute resolution is also the Pakistan factor. That China does not want to resolve the territorial dispute because that would have stretched out the Indian armed forces, both on the Pakistani front as well as on the Chinese front. So this is one connection that they have in relation to Pakistan. The Pakistan connection also becomes quite obvious because in 1963, soon after the 1962 war, Pakistan transferred 5,200 square kilometers of Sakshgam Valley to China in lieu of a few pockets in north of Siachen Glacier. So this indicates actually Pakistan is also a party to this kind of dispute in which China sees this as a kind of a balancer for India. Thirdly, in terms of the positions that China has in Ladakh, in Aksai Chin, in Tibet, Western Tibet and south of Xinjiang, there has been huge Chinese development programs here, both in the infrastructure, dual-use infrastructure, for both the civilian as well as for the military purposes. So in other words, China is activating that front in the recent period.
General, China came up with an interesting suggestion, intriguing I would say, recently when the Chinese ambassador suggested that India and Pakistan could become part of China's Silk Road initiative of trade in this part of the world, and how the two Punjabs in India and Pakistan could be brought under the umbrella of a Chinese trade initiative. And likewise, many other initiatives that China has in mind for Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, etc. Do you think India is going to go along with the Chinese angle?
This is a new geostrategic plan of China in extending its influence, first in Asia and then globally, Central Asia and beyond. And so therefore, we see these two distinct concepts of Silk Road, the maritime Silk Road, attempting to link through Myanmar and, of course, northeastern India to the Bay of Bengal elsewhere, and going on to the west, and also the land Silk Road, the whole circle going from through Kazakhstan and beyond, including Central Asian Republic on the other side. And so there are several such strands that emerge from these two central routes. Of course, the specific route that you mentioned through the central heartland, linking up with Turkmenistan, gas and energy resources from there, was actually Hillary Clinton's idea. So this was a Silk Route that Hillary Clinton had sponsored. These Silk routes are the trading routes of today, of the 21st century. These will become more relevant, and everybody will have to increasingly participate in these. But the objectives of such silk routes, the planning for these, the coordination of these, the structure of these require much more careful, deliberate planning. While India is ready and willing to cooperate in developing routes of trade, transit, and cooperation, we also have to take care of our own strategic interests.
Yes. Professor Kandipalli, quickly in the end, just want to know, what do you expect from Mr. Modi's visit to Beijing? To what extent there is hope there, or it's just starting a new relation? There are two strong leaders in both countries.
Indeed. I think Prime Minister Modi's visit, the major expectations are that there will be manufacturing centers established in India in lieu of China learning from India on the service sector, number one. Number two, in terms of expanding the trade component with China importing more goods, especially in the pharmaceutical sector as well as in the software, IT software sector. Please remember that the last year's trade deficit was more than $35 billion. In other words, India lost about $35 billion to China in the last year. So this is a huge component in terms of Indian current account deficit. So I think India will nudge China to open up its market under the WTO procedures. So I think there is a lot of scope in these economic activities.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we've got a lot of points. And in sum, I think what we've come out with in this discussion is the first, that China tends to fudge facts based on history to suit its own argument. Militarily, India is different from the India of '62 and is quite capable of giving China a strong rebuff if it decides to intrude into Indian territory. China-Pakistan relations, quite clearly, are something that Beijing is pushing to continue to keep India unsettled. And the Silk routes are going to be more and more relevant in the future as trading arrangements. And finally, Mr. Modi's got his task worked out. He has to try and get China to come around to overcoming the trade deficit, which is in China's favor vis-a-vis India. Thank you very much for being with us on this show. We'll be back next week with another episode of Latitude. Until then, goodbye.